You should see the message soon now.
Suzanne, you have no idea what pre-briefing was like. You missed a treat. Right, okay to continue? Right, can I also welcome any members of the public and press to today's meeting? Can I kindly ask you to observe the meeting only and not to speak or participate? Can I please remind you all to switch your phones to silent for the duration of the meeting? In addition, can I refer you to the protocols for remote meetings which have been previously circulated, namely, firstly, your microphone should be switched to mute unless you are speaking. Should you wish to ask a question or make a comment, can you please indicate either via the chat function or by raising your electronic hand? I will assume that you have all read the paperwork before us today prior to the meeting. Please only use the chat function to indicate if you wish to speak as an alternative to the electronic hand function or to raise any technical issues. When asking a question, can you please indicate which page number you are referring to? The first item on the agenda is to do a roll call. I am Councillor Lynette Purcell, the Chair, and I am present. I will now call on Charlotte, the Democratic Services Officer, to take the roll call.
Thanks, Chair. I've marked you as present. I've had apologies from Councillor Goldsworthy as well. Councillor Arthur Davis.
Present.
Councillor Oliver Davis.
Present, Charlotte.
John Miller.
Present, Charlotte.
Suzanne Paddison.
Present.
Councillor Sonia Reynolds.
Present.
Dave Whitelock.
Present, thank you, Charlotte.
Arwen Wilcock. Councillor Carolyn Edwards.
Present, Charlotte.
Wyndham Griffiths.
I am present, Charlotte, thank you.
Councillor Helen Kerry Clark.
Present.
Councillor Nicola Davis. Move on to Cabinet members. Councillor Lockyer.
Present, Charlotte.
Councillor Peter Richards.
Present, thank you, Charlotte.
And then if I move on to officers, Andrew Jarrett.
Present, Charlotte.
Nicola Thomas.
Present, Charlotte.
I've had apologies from Kerry Warren. Alison Davis.
Present, Charlotte.
Hayley Short.
Present.
Robert Davis.
Yeah, present.
Miss Frey Davis.
Present.
Davis.
Present.
Anyone at all?
I think there's me, Charlotte Shalay Howard.
Oh, sorry.
It's okay. Thank
There
you.
we are. There we are, Chair. I think that's everyone.
Thank you very much. Right, the next item is Chair's announcements, and we've decided to scrutinise item 7 and item 12 of the Social Care, Health and Housing Cabinet Board papers. Okay. The next item is declarations of interest. Please indicate if you have a declaration of interest by raising your electronic hand. Charlotte will circulate a declaration of interest form virtually for you to complete. Just to confirm to Councillor Kerry Clark what you raised in the pre-briefing, if we're not scrutinising an item, you don't have to declare an interest. Is there anybody who wishes to declare an interest? I don't see anybody. No, fine. So, continuing with the scrutiny papers, we have the minutes of the 5th of July 2021, therefore approval. Is there anybody who has any comments to make about the accuracy of the minutes? No, can't see anybody. Can I have a proposer and a seconder to say that the minutes are accurate?
I move, Chair.
Thank you.
Second, Chair.
Brilliant, thank you very much. So, as previously mentioned, we've decided to scrutinise items 7 and 12 on the Cabinet papers. So first of all, we'll move to item 7. So I'll give you a minute or two to find your way onto agenda item 7, which is the Social Housing Grant Prospectus for 2021. Angela, are you presenting on this?
Sorry, Chair, we'll go straight to questions, and we've got officers Robert Davis and Gareth Evans here to answer any questions.
Brilliant. Thank you very much. Let me just sort my own papers out so that I'm ready. Okay, the good news is, or bad news, depending on how you view it, we had lots of questions about this in pre-briefing. So here we go. First of all, the good news. We were really pleased to see that the schemes currently in reserves are now possible to move into the main programme. So that's a positive move. So that's excellent. So the next items were wanting to be raised by Councillor Sonia Reynolds. Sonia, take it away.
Thank you, Chair. First off, and I'm afraid I have only managed to skim the paper because, as some may have heard, we had some issues with the ModGov app, but I would like, if possible, to understand what the definition of affordable housing is in this. I'm aware that in my in discussions I've been involved with in the past in terms of Titanian, there are a number of controls on rent for some of the social housing that's available through them. And for example, we have elderly bungalows in our area provided by Titanian, and a number of cases have come to my attention of the people who are in those bungalows not being able to afford to stay there because they're so expensive. And I'm told that the rent has to be at over a minimum amount, and that is set, and the housing association can't vary it. So what are we looking at in terms of what is affordable housing with these resources? That's my first question. Shall I come back to the second one because it's slightly different?
Yeah, let the officers have a go at that one first. Thank you. Anybody want to take this? What is affordable housing?
Rob, Gareth, anybody wants to take this one?
Pass it around.
Gareth, do you want to explain that one?
I thought it would end up with me. Right. What it isn't, Councillor, to address your issue specifically, is any sort of conventional wisdom understanding of that term, because you're absolutely right. Affordable rents are not necessary. Affordable housing is not necessarily affordable to all. I guess in terms of definition, to put it in a negative way, what it is housing the cost of which isn't determined by the market. In respect of rented accommodation specifically, that breaks down into two types, as you've rightly pointed out, that made available by Titanian and the 4 or 5 other housing associations who have stock in the area, have rental costs which are benchmarked year on year by the Welsh Government. There is another type of rented accommodation that we and the Welsh Government, in terms of social housing grant particularly, do consider to be affordable, and that's called intermediate rent. Now, what that means is that it costs more than social housing and less than market private rented housing, to put it crudely. Normally about midway between the two, but so basically more expensive than housing association property, but not as expensive as your average private rented. When you move on to home purchase, there are a number of shared ownership products that have existed historically, where a housing association charges rent for part of the value of the property, whilst the tenant also purchases the proportion of the property that's affordable to them, the principle being then that over time they increase their equity, the housing association reduces theirs, and they eventually become the homeowner. The Welsh Government has, this year for the first time, and I think it's as politicians, I hope you know more than me about this. It's to do with their manifesto undertakings in terms of affordable housing building across Wales. They are only making grant available for the shared ownership model, which is pretty much as I just explained. I hope that helps somewhat.
Sonia, do you want to come back on that?
Yeah, I would value, and I suspect other members might as well, more information being shared with committee members, obviously not today, but over time, about what the benchmark issues are, because obviously there is an issue with this. It's not, we have housing in my area which is not affordable, and it's causing problems to some older people. So I wondered if it was possible to share that within this context. And are you saying that this grant, it's money for housing associations, or that we can give to whomever to build, but that if they're building if it's being built for sale, we're only looking at shared?
That's correct, yes. I mean, to be clear, I'm sorry if this is a bit pedantic, but it is an important point, is the money does not come through or from the council in any way, shape or form. It's actually a capital grant paid directly by the Welsh Government to the housing associations. Our, albeit time-consuming involvement is only really as what they would call the Strategic Housing Authority, who's determining how it's spent. But yes, in terms of the specifics, yes, only housing associations can get it, and it is, as of this year, only to build social rented accommodation or intermediate rented accommodation or shared ownership.
Thank you for that. Sonia,
just to clarify, if I may, Chair, so councils can't use it to build their own housing?
No.
They can, but as you'll be aware, that this council transferred its housing stock, and in so doing closed its housing revenue account. So for us as a council to start doing that again would be a very much less than simple process. But the grant is available to stock retaining councils to start building again, and they are.
Thank you. Second question, that's probably not for you, Gareth.
Sonia, can I just stop you a moment? Because I saw Suzanne indicating, and she might want to follow on to that bit of what you've just asked. Is that right, Suzanne? Is yours related?
Quite correct, Lynette. Have we got
right,
to
okay.
going
Can we
here?
do that and then come back to Sonia's second question?
Yeah.
Thanks, Suzanne. Take it away.
I think language is particularly important at all times when we have reports. And long ago, I did make a request to stop using the word savings and put cuts in. And now I'm on a mission to stop affordable being in a report, when we as a council can actually give a definition of affordable without going into a long drawn out explanation. It's not clear to the public what we say or would recommend to be affordable. And I until we can do that, I would like to make a suggestion that we don't use the word and use some other term. Thank you.
Does anybody want to come back on that, or do you just want to accept that as a suggestion? Nobody coming back? Right, Sonia, do you want to move to your second question?
Yes, I was pleased to note, or in my understanding, that the report obviously links in consideration with the LDP, and we're looking at the future of that document as well in the next little while. So there is, there are implications there, and that it has some focus on various valley communities. Can I ask, and I suspect this is Angela or Andrew, what the links are, therefore, between the provision of the flexible style of supported housing for the disabled and the elderly, where people, extra care or whatever it is, whether that features within the links and links in with this report, or whether the provision of that sort of style of housing by housing associations would be funded under a different sort of grant, because I'm very interested in making sure that sort of provision is provided within valley communities.
I can part answer that question, Councillor Reynolds, in as much as in terms of extra care and all housing provision, including residential care, extra care, etc., that is all being looked at as part of the future for elderly people. The bit I can't answer is whether this funding would go towards the building of such a scheme. Gareth might be able to help me out there. But in terms of all forms of accommodation, that is being looked at and worked on as we speak, as we see the decline in perhaps residential domiciliary. What is the future for older people in Neath, Talbot? Are we looking at older people's villages? I did bring a paper to committee around Pobble and something they were considering in the Neath Valley. So all of that is being considered in the round. We are in the middle of coming towards another wave. So as we progress, we're looking and re-looking at everything. So there will be future papers coming to you. Apology, I'm not an expert in terms of the funding and the grant side. I think maybe Gareth can enlighten committee on that bit.
Gareth, can you help us?
Residential care, no. Nursing care, no. Older persons extra care, yes.
Right.
Older persons sheltered housing, as we no longer call it, but I'm sure you all know what we're talking about if I say that. Yes. And what the specific scheme mentioned has already been highlighted by Pobble and is earmarked in the programme that this prospectus is talking about.
Sonia, do you want to come back?
Thank you very much. Would like to see something in my valley, but that's wonderful. Thank you.
Okay, thank you for those very in-depth questions. Thank you. Okay, mine's a fairly simple question, and I was grateful to the officer for sending me a written answer, but I think the committee needs to know what page 11 there is a table with figures in it. And it says, for example, 21-22, the allocation is 9,829, but it's not clear what that figure actually represents. So I think it was Rob replied to me on this. Could he please tell us what that figure represents?
Yeah, sure. That figure is the £9.9 million that the Welsh Government are allocating us for this next period per year. And that is going to basically equate to building about 448 units of accommodation.
Brilliant, thank you for that. Okay, Councillor Whitelock, Dave, you wanted to come in next?
Yes, thank you, Chair. It's jumping down to Appendix 2, page 27. Give everybody a couple of seconds to scroll down, I'll find it.
Page 27, got it. Got it.
Got it. Just like to know where Port Talbot valleys have gone. We got Neath and valleys, Pontardawe and valleys, and Port Talbot. We got the Avon Valley, Goitra Valley. Have they been taken out for a specific reason?
Anybody?
They have been taken out for a specific reason, and that reason is that the work undertaken by ORS in year before last now did not identify the need for any additional housing in the Avon Valley over the period in question. I've hinted at, I hope, in the document that we will be looking to confirm that is actually still correct next year, because we are going to have a new standardized pan-Wales model of undertaking housing market assessments. I think it's on the verge of being completed by the Welsh Government now, and I will be working, I and Rob will be working with colleagues in planning to rerun the numbers through that model. And I suppose in terms of valley strategies, etc., hoping perhaps it makes a difference. But the numbers crunched by ORS did not identify a need for additional housing in the Avon Valley, and that unfortunately is the reason.
That seems very strange. We got building projects going on all over the place up here at the moment, so that's very strange. Okay.
Thanks, Dave. Suzanne, is this question related to Dave's comment?
No, it isn't a separate question, Chair.
Okay, thank you. In that case, I'll work through my list. You're happy with that, Dave? Well, you've accepted the answer. Should we put it like that? Carolyn, would you like to come in next? Councillor.
Yeah, thank you, Chair. Yeah, my question follows on from Dave's really. It's on page 26, 27 again. And looking at the figures there, I just wondered if the number of houses estimated in this plan are sufficient for the future use. We know that families and singles are struggling at the moment to find accommodation, whether rented or private. This situation is only going to get worse really as the population grows. So I'm just wondering if there are enough houses going to be built in the next 10 years or whatever. Thank you.
Anybody want to comment on that?
I would just say that it is based on that work undertaken by ORS, but it does only relate to, apologies, Councillor Patterson, affordable housing as defined by the Welsh Government currently. It does not relate to market housing. And they also identified a fairly significant number of, or amount of market housing that needs to be developed. And well, I'm not privy to whether we're on target to meet that. Others would have to speak to that.
Okay.
Are you happy with that, Caroline?
Yes, thank you very much, Chair.
Right, Councillor Kerry Clark, Helen.
Thanks. I think Angela's partially answered this already, but when I looked at it, I thought, you know, from my experience of people I work with, they're generally capable of living on their own, but need a one-story building to live in, such as a bungalow. And there doesn't seem to be any sort of mention in there of specific amounts of that need. And thinking of going back to what Gareth said as well, in that situation, quite often the shared ownership model would not be an option, would it? Because of the age of the people applying for these properties. So is there any way of influencing the housing associations to allocate a certain amount of properties that would, you know, enable independent living, but for people with, you know, disabilities or have difficulties with walking?
Gareth, do you want to come back on that?
This document, you're absolutely correct, is only framed in terms of number of bedrooms in the property. It doesn't necessarily distinguish between an apartment, a studio, a bungalow, or even a one-bed house. What it does say is that the majority of assessed projected need for affordable housing is for 1 and 2 bed. I suppose the answer to your question is yes, definitely we can as a council address what model that 1 and 2 bedroom housing takes, and we do. Colleagues in adult social care and indeed in regeneration and planning work with us in the retained housing service to, as best we can, determine what any given scheme as it's being worked up should look like. There are live examples at the moment in the centre of Neath, for example, and outside where we are looking at who should live in them, what type of accommodation should they be. But I personally, don't know about Rob, would take on board what you say, and maybe even the new housing market assessment model will enable us to do that better.
Thank you. You happy with that, Helen? Brilliant. Thank you. Right, Suzanne, you've been very patient.
I didn't attend the briefing, so I'm perfectly willing to wait. Thank you, Chair. My question is, we designate these buildings according to bedrooms, but we don't know what size these dwellings are. And in years gone by, it used to be that a council house, I know we haven't got any, but a council house was a family home. And when we're talking of social rentals these days, they seem to be shrinking over time. And that has a knock-on effect to how happy people are, marital breakdowns, and mental health, if you're just all in too much of a small space. So is there any way of finding out the actual size of the dwellings rather than the numbers of bedrooms?
Gareth, do you want to take that?
I think that relates to question asked earlier on about providing more information, which Rob and I certainly can do, because there are minimum space standards that apply to anything developed using social housing grant.
Yeah.
In fact, historically, there's been a lessening of those standards in relation to certain types of affordable housing, but the Welsh Government has, during this round of funding, made it perfectly clear that those are expected to apply to each and every
Well, I'm glad to hear it.
home developed using social housing grant.
Yeah.
But I can certainly find out what those standards are.
I'll be obliged, and I'll be grateful for that. But I'm really happy to hear that the Welsh Government is sticking to minimum standards. Thank you very much.
Thank you. That was an interesting question. Angela, I can see you indicating.
Yeah, so just to give some reassurance, the director and I went to visit with Pobl some different things being built in Newport recently, and they are definitely building everything to a quality standard, not a minimum standard, recognising that actual point that is no point, building rabbit warrens and then breakdowns happen, etc. So we were privy to 3 different sites. One was an older person's extra care scheme where they'd made it child friendly so that grandchildren and everybody could come in. It was very impressive. An older person's, cradle to grave village, which was very impressive. And that's the sort of thing they're anticipating they're going to build in Neath. And we also saw the start of a new older person's complex, and that's where we went in with our hard hats and our jackets on, but to see the way it was being built. And I think if I could just say one thing in context, it's probably timely that this is being spoken about today. We have been for some time, myself, the chief exec, the director, the cabinet members, been talking about housing generally, particularly in light of what happened with homelessness over the last 18 months. And what's become clear is that we have different parts of the council doing different parts of housing. So we have generation, we have gypsy travellers, we have strategic housing. And what we're looking to do is to recruit somebody to bring all those strands together, because there's not one officer any longer in the council who's able to do that. We've all got busy day jobs, but someone who can coordinate all of the housing strands across the council, not just the directorate separately. So once that's in situ, we can bring that back and you can see a fuller picture of what's being planned across the county borough.
That's very interesting to hear, particularly the cradle to grave. I know you've been mentioning that for what seems like several years now, and it just seems such a good idea. But these things happen slowly, but that's a very positive report. Thank you. Councillor John Miller, I can see you indicating.
Yeah, thank you, Chair. Just wondering if the standards that Gareth was talking about could be shared with all the committee, please.
Yes, please. Thank you. Right, okay. On page 20, and again, the officer has replied to me in writing on this, but I thought you might want this to be shared. On page 20, the penultimate paragraph begins, "The only caveat to thus supporting market housing development by housing associations is that the council would expect to see any capital receipts gained when shared owners increase their equity reinvested in affordable housing." Now, despite the fact that I vice chair audit, I'm not very good at some of these terms. So could he just explain to us what that actually means?
Yeah, I think Gareth touched on that earlier. Gareth, do you want to expand on that one again?
Right. There was an interesting difference of opinion between the local housing associations, all of whom I consulted on this, what was going into this draft document. but one of them is very much about developing a mixed economy of housing in any specific large development, especially, and that has involved them moving into developing market housing. No reason particularly to object to them doing that. The only thing we were keen to make sure is that if any of this grant goes into developing any shared ownership property, then as a person progresses towards owning it in its entirety, that involves money being paid to the housing association.
Yeah.
And we just wanted to be absolutely certain that when they receive that money, they don't use that to develop market housing. They use it to develop affordable housing. So the concept of in perpetuity in terms of it being affordable, the money is then being recycled and reused, so that you haven't otherwise effectively got social housing grant building market housing, because that's not what it's about.
Thank you very much for that detail, and I think the committee would be very supportive of you pushing in that direction, please. I can see something happening through the back door here otherwise. Right, okay, final one from me on page 25. Yes, strategic relevance. Notwithstanding anything outlined above, the Council reserves the right to not approve any proposal that panel members agree conflicts with a wider strategic agenda. Again, I've had this answer in writing, but I think the committee might want to know what that actually means. I think it was Rob.
Yeah, Gareth, do you want to take that one again? Gareth provided me the information for that one.
He's working
Yes.
today.
Yep. Right. What I'm saying there is that we developed, if you like, a pseudoscientific scoring methodology here that I think is sound. I think it's fit for purpose, but it's never going to always give you the right answer to what should be developed where. And so we need to allow for officers senior to me, but officers to decide when, for example, just because a scheme scored more than others, it might not be appropriate to develop it because it would contribute, by way of example, to pre-existing antisocial behaviour in an area. Conversely, a scheme might not have scored fantastically well, relatively speaking, but it might be crucial that it's developed in order to make a wider regeneration project viable. Those are the kinds of things. So it's not something that would be used willy-nilly, as it were, but it's a proviso whereby we could, officers senior to me could justify not necessarily sticking rigidly to a scoring order and prioritising spend.
Right, thank you for that. So it's to give flexibility when necessary here. We all know about scoring not necessarily always answering the problem. Right, Angela and Suzanne. Angela, do you want to come back in on that?
Yeah, it's exactly what you said there, Councillor. It is about flexibility, but it is looking at where we've been the last 18 months and where we're likely to be in the next 3 to 5 years. So we don't know what the world in older people's services is going to look like at this point in time. There will be a report coming to you in September about care homes and what that might look like. There'll be a similar follow-up about what domiciliary care services are looking like, and all of that plays into the mix. So whilst we have a social housing grant programme, we may well have something different or alternatives that we would want to build on. So we have to have that degree of flexibility.
Excellent. So flexibility is key. Right, Suzanne, do you want to come in at this point?
Thank you. Yes, I was just going to give my, I agree with this 100% as well. I'm sure other members of the committee who were all nodding as well, because, you know, you cannot have a system that is so rigid that there cannot be any intervention. And I'm very pleased to see that that intervention has been sort of factored in from the very beginning. Thank you, Chair.
Brilliant, thank you. And finally, from pre-briefing, unless anybody else thinks of anything else, we had Sonia wishing to raise something here. Councillor Reynolds.
I'm probably going to bring it up in forward look under the scrutiny agenda, if I may, Councillor Purcell.
Okay, fine, we'll skip that one then. So now we have to come to the end of this item. There's no recommendation. This is for noting only. So we're now going back in my notes to my officer's wonderful notes, back to Charlotte's notes, and we now need to consider moving into private. But before we do that, the forward work programme we have noted. Everybody happy with that? Yep.
Chair, I don't know whether at this point Councillor Reynolds wants to mention what she would like to add on the forward work programme.
This way you want to bring it in, Councillor Reynolds, the forward work programme.
I just wanted to add in a more, you know, given what Angela has said, it puts a different reflection on it, and we'll have a single officer drawing stuff together, etc. So, you know, it puts a different reflection on where we might go, but it would be very useful to add into the forward work programme, in my view, something that looks at you know, housing policy, what we have and how it links going forward. And I think this committee could really value just a very definite overview on that. And as Angela said, if they're looking at recruiting, then maybe we wait for the officer, but, you know, very much, I think, a useful thing to add to our forward work programme.
I think as a committee, we could say that what we've heard today is very forward thinking. I was very pleased with what I've heard from Angela and other officers, that we're looking at the last 18 months, we're looking at what we've learned, we're looking at the fact that nothing is proscribed in any way whatsoever. And I think we should have some interesting documents, although probably long and detailed ones, and we should have some interesting documents to look at from September going onwards. Thank you. Right, thank you for that, Councillor Reynolds. So that's the forward work programme. We're now to urgent items, of which we have none. And we're now through to access to meetings. Right, to resolve to exclude the public for the following items pursuant to Regulation 4, 3 and 5 of Statutory Instrument 2001, number 2290, and the relevant exempt paragraphs of Part 4 of Schedule 12A to the Local Government Act 1972. Can I have a proposer and seconder to move into private, please?
Chair, before we move, I have a proposer and a seconder. I can see Andrew Jarrett's hand is up, so before we move into private, I just wanted to raise your attention to that.
Okay, Andrew.
Yeah, Chair, thank you very much. We've mistakenly put the wrong paragraph in the reason for moving to private. So the report names staff and gives their roles, and so the paragraph we'd be utilising is, I think, paragraph 18, Alison, isn't it? Rather than paragraph 14. So apologies for that. I just wanted to make sure that members are aware of that before you move to private.
Right, how can we tell this is the end of term? Right, okay, let's keep going. So just asking Charlotte to confirm